Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is Michael Voss, and you are listening to No Soundbites Allowed. Let's get right to it. Hello. So, I want to talk a little bit today about something that's just coming out into the news. You probably just heard about it, and that is the fact that the House has just passed a bill to make Washington, D.C. a state. And I'm sure many people have just been hearing about that. It's just been announced. I see it on CNBC. House passes bill to make Washington, D.C., the 51st state. Sounds great, right? Very interesting news. Came out today, June 26th at about 2:44. People are probably just hearing about it as they get home from work. And you may be wondering, wait a minute, Washington, D.C. isn't a state? What? You mean they don't get a vote? They don't have people in Congress? That doesn't make any sense at all. Why is that? Or maybe you're like Maxine Waters. Well, it's obvious that DC needs to become a state because the only reason why they aren't doing it is racism, which is what Representative Maxine Waters is saying, that it's about race. DC isn't a state because it's all racist, and it goes back to racism. And that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And people haven't really thought about why DC should become a state. Why now is the reason why DC is going to be a state. And I'm going to go over just three, and I have in my notes here, three reasons of why we're seeing Democrats trying to make Washington, D.C. a state today in 2020, and why they didn't do it in 2009 or any time prior to that. Why is it today that we're seeing that? Well, let's answer this question. So I'm going to assume, first of all, that you happen to, even though you may be an American citizen, you probably haven't read the Constitution. And let's assume also that when you went to school, you were not taught the Federalist Papers. You have no idea what they are, so you don't know the American history. And let's assume that you haven't looked at history and you don't know where the American capital was. Like, that you didn't know that in New Amsterdam, then thus New York City, was the capital of the United States up until we created Washington, D.C., which stands for District of Columbia, by the way. So assuming you know none of these things, because your teachers never bothered to teach you that, because it was never part of the curriculum, a liberalized curriculum, that you need to know why D.C. would or wouldn't be a state. So let's actually go back in history a little bit. Let's try and figure this out. Now, if you want to go to, and I have, the Federalist Papers, which you can look up, and I'll have the links in the description here. And I'm going to Yale Law School. And their publishing of the Federalist Papers in number 43. This was written by James Madison, one of the people critical in writing the Constitution itself. And in the second part of this, and I'm going to expand that a little bit for you. In the second part of this, in this second section here, James Madison goes into some detail about why Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, has to be separate of any state, and why it needs to be its own thing. Well, let's deal with this very carefully, and I want to be very clear here. One of the reasons that he's going into this and why we need Washington, D.C. to not be a state is very simple. Because of power. It is a disruption of the power of the United States. Because not only would Washington, D.C. get members, representatives of Congress and two senators, but they would also get money. Money from the government to that state. It makes it very, very powerful. In fact, that's one of the reasons why many states were upset that the capital was in New York State and in New York City. It's too much money. You're talking about everyone who has to travel to that state. So there's tourism. You're talking about people visiting that state, dignitaries from other countries. That's money. You're talking about holding events of the state. You know, dignitaries come over, they have dinners, they travel the city, they look at the historical landmarks. That's money. That's other governments spending money. That's on a whole other scale than just going to see the biggest ball of yarn. We're talking about governments visiting other governments. And you're also talking about the influence of these individuals from a state who now have control of the government. And one of the things James Madison's very specific about is that he's talking about the power of any state to use its military, to use its economic forces to try and alter the power of the government, to be able to influence the power of the government over all of the states. Now, don't have to believe me on this. You can read the Federalist Papers for yourself, but it's very straightforward. And that's why New York City couldn't be the capital of America. They had to remove it. The other states were absolutely jealous. People were concerned about the concentration of power. They needed it to get out of there. And they didn't like that New York State, having representatives, having senators, could influence the spending of the government and have its own power. It's too much. So very simply, why don't we have, or why is Washington, D.C., by the Constitution, controlled separately of any state government, of any legislators, even city governments? Why is all the power put into a Congress to run the Capitol? Because of power, because of money. It's real simple. So not only do we know that, and that clause is in the Constitution, it's under Article 1, Clause 17, the seat of the government. And they again go into, to some detail, that it's important that Congress be separate, that the government be separate of where it is, where it's located at. Now, in the Constitution, it doesn't say that the government has to be in Washington, D.C., where we see it now. Could have been anywhere in the country, and every state wanted it. And again, the reason they didn't get it and why it became its own place outside of any state is very simple. It wasn't because of racism. It was because of power. It was because of abuse. It was because of money. Real simple. And that was something that was understood from 1783 to the modern day, up until the year 2000. Now, it was in the year 2000 that we saw that there was a change in the mentality brought by Democrats who happened to control Washington, D.C. And they wanted D.C. to become a state. And one of the best ways to get everyone to say, let's make Washington, D.C. a state is, one, don't teach people the Constitution. Don't teach people the Federalist Papers that explain the Constitution. And on top of that, say, well, there's no taxation without representation. Except Washington, D.C. was never meant to be the city it is now. And everyone who lived there understood you're getting taxed, but you're not getting representation, specifically because if you did, then you would have an abuse of power. Very capable. There would be a problem. And to us, and the compromise, and for those who are there, the compromise is, well, you're giving that up because you're in the Capitol. And most of the people who were in the Capitol actually went and voted in their own state where they had a separate home. And they had their ability for taxation and representation in another state. So you weren't really expected to live and solely be in Washington, D.C. You were expected to be in another state and travel to and from Washington, D.C. You know, this is back in the days where they mistakenly assumed that people would not be in government for their entire lives, that their entire career would just be politics. This is back in the days where they expected people to go into government, serve a term, maybe two, and then get out of government and go back to doing their private lives. That was the expectation at that time. Nowadays, we know that you can be in government for 5, 6, 7 decades without any experience in anything else whatsoever and become a neo-feudalistic lord over your subjects, the serfs, the voters, And that's our modern understanding of politics, but that's wrong. That's not what it's supposed to be about. That's not how it's supposed to work at all. So when you hear Washington, D.C., they say, the Democrats, they voted for this. I believe the vote was 232 to 180, and it passed. Yes, it was 232 to 180. And Democrats are very proud of this. Ooh, it's a good thing. And they're telling you that it's good because this is about race. This is about racism. And that's a lie. That's a manipulation. If you believe that Washington, D.C. has to become a state because of racism, then you have been manipulated. There is no other way of saying that. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. Because it's never been about race. It's about the government and having power over that government. But let's go through this. Now, let's say you still want Washington, D.C. to be a state. And you think that it has to happen and you're a Democrat. Or you're a Libertarian or you're a Republican and you think that, it should be a state. The question would be, why now? Why should Washington, D.C. now be a state? Because they've been trying this since 2000. And the interesting thing here is, in 2009, the Democrats had a supermajority. Again, in case you've never been taught this in your schools, and you probably haven't. I'm not knocking you if you haven't. But if you've never been taught this, a supermajority is when a political party has the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate all in the same party. And not only that they have so many members that have been elected that even if the opposition party tries to stop something, they can't. They don't have enough votes. This is exactly what happened in 2009 when we got Obamacare. Democrats put all of their power, they had for 1 year the ability to pass any legislation and all legislation that they could possibly want without any ability of Republicans to stop them. And the only thing that the Democrats did in 2009 was they passed Obamacare and they passed the Obama stimulus. And we have seen that both of those have been complete failures. They have not lived up to any of the promises that we have been given about them. And in fact, there have been several misstatements about them that we were promised versus what actually happened. So if Washington, D.C. becoming a state was so important to Democrats and so vital to half the people being represented, and Democrats have been pushing this since 2000, why was it in the year 2009, when Democrats had a supermajority and could pass anything they wanted, why did they not care about Washington, D.C.? If this was about racism and being able to be fair to a black constituency that are the majority of the people who live in the city, then why didn't Democrats, the party supposedly of minorities, why did they not go for statehood and pass that in 2009 when no one could stop them? And the answer is they didn't care, because the black vote is not important, and they didn't care whether DC was represented and taxed or not. They only care about it when Republicans are in charge and when they need a political advantage. That's the honest truth. Because if it were not the truth, then in 2009, Washington, D.C. would have been the 51st state. That is as simple as it gets. So let me ask you, what are Democrats getting out of this? Why do they want to do this now? I mean, what's the point? Well, the point is that there would be 2 more members of the Senate, which means that the current advantage for Republicans would shift, and the Senate could go into the Democrats' hands. And that would allow them to pass more laws that they want that have an advantage to the Democratic Party. They would also get 1 more member of the House of Representatives, because Washington, D.C. has 700,000 people. Gives them about the same number of people as, pretty much any representative in the House of Representatives. They represent about 720,000 people. It's one of the reasons why New York State is going to be losing 2 members of Congress, because we lost 1.8 million people that left the state to go to other states. Same thing applies here. There's about 700,000 people, so they're going to get one representative. Again, that adds to their voting bloc. That helps to get them to more of a majority. And that gives them more power over votes on raising taxes, as Democrats have said they want to do, in cutting back police and defunding police departments and putting in federal regulations over your local police departments. Yes, so Washington, D.C., that knows nothing about your hometown in Wichita, Kansas, or Binghamton, New York, or anywhere else in the nation. They know nothing about it, but they're going to tell your police department what it needs to do to protect you, even though they have no idea what goes on in your neighborhood. And what we're going to see is that this would allow them to pass more of the laws that they want. You know, things like PC language control, so that you couldn't speak certain words. Like if someone was transgendered, you would have to refer to them as Z or they. Otherwise, you could get penalized. Something that we've seen in Canada that is very popular for many Democrats here in the United States. It would also mean if Washington, D.C. is the 51st state, it changes the Electoral College. It suddenly throws off the math that everyone knows and has known since the 1700s on how someone's going to be elected president. And again, I'm assuming you know nothing about history of the United States, how our government runs, and let's just assume that none of that's known to you. The Electoral College is actually what elects our president. Based on the number of popular votes, that equals how many delegates are going to vote in that state, and those delegates are the ones who actually elect the president. That's why there's 219 is the golden number, and that's why we see, President Trump instead of President Hillary Clinton. Thank God. So the Democrats want to throw that math off. They want to switch that. They want to shift these numbers, especially as they're losing populations in cities and states like New York State and California, where people are leaving those ultra blue states that are in absolute debt and are falling apart. People are leaving those states. New York State has led, I believe it's the last 4 years in a row on the number one state that people are getting out of, taking businesses and getting out of that state and going into other states like Texas, like Florida, which are becoming more and more popular. Matter of fact, Florida has exceeded New York State. It now has more people in it than New York State does. So New York State is less and less powerful in terms of government and representation and passing laws. So it may be blue, but it's not important. It doesn't have as much weight. So Democrats need another area that they could have control over to make up the difference for the power that New York State is losing, as an example, and also in California as another example. And also you could say Michigan and Detroit, again, losing power. People are leaving because those areas are falling apart. They need more power since they're going to states that are more Republican, and therefore they don't have power. So this is all about power. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with being equitable or being fair. No, this is all about one simple thing. Who's in charge? Who has the power and control? They're distracting you with the idea, well, it's because it's all black. No, it's not. Because if they cared about that, they would have already fixed it. Again, in 2009, they had the power to do this already, and they didn't care. Like many things that we see with the Democratic Party in the modern day, and again, this is mostly because of progressives, things like Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, Black Lives Matters, the far, far left, Antifa, the Democratic Socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Representative Ilhan Omar. We're talking about people who don't believe in the Constitution. They want to destroy the Constitution, and they want to make America a socialist, communist state. These people want more power. They happen to be in the Democratic Party, so the Democratic Party wants more power. But they don't really care about who they use to get that power. So today it's advantageous to say Washington, D.C. is black. You're not being represented in your taxes, so you should be a state. Even though they're ignoring, historically, you never would have gotten your taxes. It didn't matter whether Washington, D.C. was white or black. They never had that. And it was put in the Constitution because they shouldn't have that, because the founders understood that if you gave the capital of the nation the power of a state, there would be abuses rampant throughout the whole system. But, Democrats are not worried about abusing power. We've seen that over and over again. So is this a big deal? Should you be concerned? Should you be there saying, hey, let's give statehood to Washington, D.C.? And the answer is no, you shouldn't. And you really shouldn't care that they're saying that it's about race. Because if you do, you're being used. You're being misled. Because that's not the answer. If it was important, it would have already been done. The Democrats already had the power to do it, and they didn't care. They didn't even bring up the issue. And it's their issue from 2000. They had 9 years to prepare for it. When they got President Obama in office, they had a supermajority. They could have passed that in 5 minutes, and they didn't care. They didn't even mention it. It wasn't even an idea. So that kind of tells you what the reality is. So I just wanted to go over this and just tell you, these are the reasons why Democrats today, June 26th of 2020, why they want Washington, D.C. to be a state. And these are also the reasons why you, in 2020, should oppose it. Because it's not about you. It's not about being black or white or any other race. This is about power. And it's not power for you. It's power for the political party that happens to be the least concerned about the people they say they're concerned about. It's straightforward. But if you disagree with me, I'm more than happy to hear your thoughts. Please tell me why I'm wrong about anything I've just mentioned. Why is it that Democrats today want to see Washington, D.C. become a state? You can reach me at Twitter at MVConsult. You can reach me on YouTube at No Soundbites Allowed. You can reach me on Facebook at Voss Political Commentary. And of course, you can always call in at 607-242-1582. I look forward to seeing your text or hearing your comments. And of course, we will be here on Sunday at 2:30, looking forward to talking to you live on this program. Until then, I want everyone to be well, and I'll talk to you soon.